So a huge thanks to everyone that has joined the event today, hosted by ClimaTalk. We are doing a Meet the Expert session focusing on the IPCC. ClimaTalk is a newly formed organisation, actually, a non-profit organisation. We are a group of international and diverse young people who volunteer to try and disseminate clear information about climate policy and also increase the involvement of young people in the fight against the climate crisis. So do get involved today, ask as many questions as you have. And then if after the event, you want to find out more information, we write short articles, usually around 300, 600 words, and these are all published on our website. We also list other events that we host, and we have created a map of all, or as many as we know of, climate and environmental university courses, which are available all around the world. So take a look at these later if you're interested. And then finally, just a couple of our social media if you want to stay in touch with ClimaTalk and find out more about our events. But let's dive straight into the event today. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as the IPCC, is a United Nations body that was established in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and UNEP to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessments of the climate change, the socioeconomic risks of the crisis, and options to adapt and mitigate against it. The IPCC does not conduct its own research, and I'm sure the panelists can explain a little bit more today on how they draw the evidence for the reports. There are 5 different groups that work for the IPCC reports. 3 of them are known as working groups, and we have 2 speakers today that are part of working groups for the IPCC. And there is also a task force called the Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories, which specifically looks at measuring greenhouse gas emissions for each country. And we can talk a little bit more about that later as well. There are 3 different types of reports that the IPCC publish. The first is the IPCC assessment report, and these are the main reports published by the IPCC. They're very long documents and cite many applications. Helpfully, all the reports have a summary for policymakers, which outlines the key findings for each section of the report. The next form of document is the special reports, which look at specific issues related to climate crisis that its member governments have agreed to investigate. For example, you may have heard of the special 1.5 degree report that was published in 2018. Finally, as I mentioned, the task force work on IPCC methodology reports, which aim to help governments make greenhouse gas inventories, how to calculate greenhouse gas emissions, and how greenhouse gases can be removed from the atmosphere and what the sinks are. Now we'll move into our panelists after that really short introduction. I'm really pleased to say we have 3 panelists from a range of backgrounds. Firstly, we have Jolene Cook, who's worked in climate change field for over 15 years as either an academic researcher or as a government advisor. She's the UK's focal point for the IPCC and head of the International Climate Science in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. She is also the head of climate science in the UK's COP26 unit and is the lead negotiator for Science Matters under the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change. We also have Joeri Rogeli, who is the Director of Research at the Grantham Institute at Imperial College. Joeri's contributed to the 5th assessment report and is also a lead author for the Working Group 1 on the 6th assessment report. He was also a coordinating lead author for the IPCC 1.5 special degree report and is also a long-serving author for the annual UNEP emissions gap reports. And finally, we have Antonetta Casandia, who is from Guatemala and is involved in IPCC's Working Group 3, and she is currently contributing to Chapter 17 of the 6th assessment report. So before we move on to ask some questions to the panelists, if we could go back to Slido, hopefully everyone still has that open. If not, if you could go back to the link that Vince has posted in the chat. and type in the code again, you should see on Slido there is a Q&A section. And here, if you'd like to post your questions for the panelists, and you can also upvote questions that other people have posted, and we will put these to the panelists. Or if you're struggling with this, just pop them in the Zoom chat and we can direct them to the panelists too. So I will just start off with asking each of the panelists to maybe explain a little bit more about how they got involved with the IPCC. So Joeri, if you'd like to start and just explain how you got involved and maybe what the difference is between a lead author and a coordinating lead author.
Sure, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for organizing this event. It's really nice to speak about how the IPCC works, what kind of work it's doing, and but also really nice to explain how it really conducts its mission. How I got involved in the IPCC, I think you already mentioned I've served as a coordinating lead author and a lead author on the reports. I can explain later what the difference is. But first and foremost, I got involved in the IPCC as something called a contributing author, and that was actually during my research for my PhD, for my doctorate. Actually, my PhD supervisor at that time was one of the coordinating authors, and so he had a few tasks to do for his poor PhD student, which was me at that time. And so that's how I got involved in the fifth assessment report of the IPCC, which was around in the period from 2010 to 2013, 2014. And that's really how I got started to get to know the IPCC, and also how it works from the inside. At the same time, I was also an advisor to some governments in the UNFCCC, so in the climate negotiations, and I was very much made aware of how powerful these reports were, how much they are used, how much they are cited, and how they provide critical evidence to those negotiations. So that was then a motivation for me to keep involved. And when then they asked me, I think it was in 2016, to become a coordinating lead author on the 1.5 degree special report, well, I very happily accepted. On the different roles that there are, so as a contributing author, you are basically brought in to contribute on a very specific topic. For example, there is a particular literature you know very well, and to really bring together all that literature. Each section of the report is at the same time organized and coordinated by lead authors. Lead authors are kind of the main, let's call them workhorse of the report. These are the people that write the chapter, that are responsible for bringing everything, for bringing together to creating quite a bit of the figures, or at least to sign off of them. We have also Antoinette here, who will provide a chapter scientist perspective on that as well. And then finally, there is the coordinating lead authors. They're 2 or 3 per chapter, and they just need to bring everything together. They also need to coordinate between the chapters and ultimately make sure that when the summary for policymakers that you've already mentioned is written, that the summary for policymakers draws the right balance between the different chapters, is internally consistent, and so on. So it's just different levels of responsibility with different tasks, very often kind of going together with the level you are in your career as well.
That's really helpful, thanks. And Antoinette, would you like to just build on that and maybe explain how you got involved with the IPCC and what your role as a chapter scientist is?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. I'm going to share my screen for a few moments because I like to talk a lot and I have few time. Can I?
Yes, Emma, I don't know if you could let Emma just sort that out, and we'll come back to you, Anthony. We'll go to Jolene just to answer this initial round, and we'll come back to you next while we're sorting that out. Yeah, so Jolene, would you like to expand on what your role is as the focal point for the IPCC and how you work with counterparts around the world?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to this talk. I mean, it's great that a lot of work on helping people understand what the IPCC is and actually how it works. So I'm going to give a slightly very different perspective from Antoinette and Joeri. So I, as you mentioned, so I'm a civil servant. I'm a climate science advisor within UK government. I should probably say my first interaction with the IPCC actually took place when I was a researcher. So as a researcher, the IPCC reports were always the first place you'd go to when you wanted to find out about a new topic. You know, just to give you a complete assessment of the latest scientific understanding. So it was perfect. But didn't really understand what their full purpose was at that point. And it wasn't until I joined the civil service in 2009 that I realized actually how important, how influential these reports were. And since then, since I joined, I've been involved in the approvals and scopings for many reports. I think the first one I was involved in was the special report on extreme events. And then I was involved in all the approvals of the 5th assessment report. And then since I became focal point, so that's the UK's representative to the IPCC, I've been involved in all the approvals of the 3 special reports that have been mentioned. So the 1.5 degree report, the Oceans Report, Land Report, and the one in 2019, which is updating those methodologies to help countries calculate their greenhouse gas emissions. So what do I do as focal point? Well, firstly, I have to represent the UK in the IPCC. Maybe what useful to point out, the IPCC, I know we often talk about the authors, but the IPCC itself is actually the member governments and the elected experts. Often people get that a little bit mixed up with the authors, but the authors are we nominate experts to come and take part in reports. But really the focal points represent the governments in the member countries in the IPCC. And our role is really to help direct the work of the IPCC. As you said, it's about providing policy relevant information. So how do they find out what's policy relevant? Well, they ask the countries, what's useful for them. So my role is to obviously go back to the UK government and ask all the policymakers around here what they'd find useful, what's relevant, what information do they need to inform their climate policies, and then go back to the IPCC and help them identify, work out what reports they're going to produce, help them scope out their work programme each assessment cycle. And then once we've agreed that as the IPCC and agreed on the reports, we then have to agree on the scope of those reports. And then we also, as UK, as focal points, we nominate our experts to participate in those reports. So I would go back to the UK research community, I would let them know that we've finished scoping reports. I would let them know that we're looking for experts to be involved. And then help the community understand how they can get involved and then put forward a whole load of names. And then from all the names they've received from all over the world of experts, the IPCC Bureau, so that's the elected group of experts, they look at who they've got, work out what reports need to be written, work out what expertise, and they choose from this great big pool of experts. So it's a long process. Once I do that, reports are underway. And then, as you probably know, every IPCC report goes through a very rigorous expert and government review process. Really very important, the reviews. So that's when we make sure, they get peer reviewed. We ensure that they're robust, that they represent the scientific literature, that they're balanced, and that the reports are clear and that they're policy relevant and policy neutral as well. So the governments are involved in that. And again, as focal point, I coordinate the UK's review and consult with people across UK government, as well as the UK research community. And then the final stage is when it comes, the panel comes together for a week at the end of the report to go through the summary for policymakers sentence by sentence and agree that to make sure that it's representative of the underlying report, that it's very clear and easily understood by non-experts, because this is the report that's going to go to, you know, the policymakers who are not necessarily experts in the particular scientific issues it's covering. So it has to be put in a way that they can understand what these things mean for their climate policies. So that's a very brief overview of what I do as focal point, and I'll stop there to let her come back in with her introduction.
I can see we've already got loads of follow-up questions, so yeah, we'll come back. And then, would you like to share your screen now? It should work, hopefully.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, the first question is, how can I involve, because IPCC is part of United Nations and is a Peace Nobel, you know, is the important think tank in the world. And the second is, how can I enter in IPCC for Twitter account? When I see the call in 2019, I feel so exciting. I wanna be part for IPCC, and I said my boss I wanna apply. And then finally, the Technical Support Unit Working Group 3 wrote me, welcome IPCC. I wanna show you the code. Can you see the code?
Yeah, we can see the web page.
Yeah, this is the first meet with IPCC 2 years ago. If you are young people, you can enter, but you need to apply. This is the second option. If you see, all questions, all recruitments are inside our IPCC webpage. Thank you. This is the first question.
So just to ask a follow-up question to that. So did you apply on the webpage?
Yeah.
And how long did it take for the application process to?
I remember only I sent my CV, a recommendation letter, and a specific form. Just that. It's so easy, but you need to have discipline. You need to have a holistic way, not only focus in climate change. You need to focus in political sciences, history, business, and other areas.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. And then could you just explain what the difference is potentially between a chapter scientist and a contributing author, if there is a difference?
Yeah, the difference is chapter scientist is a system for class and LAs. And contributor author is like Rogeri, you need help with the other LAs. It's a specific research about, for example, in my case, I help the class, the coordinators, authors, around Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, for the whole chapter, for the whole group.
Great, thank you very much for that. And then just to follow up to that, do any of you have a recommendation on sort of what the best way is to get involved with the IPCC? Is it staying in academia and trying to go down that route, or like Antoinette has said, applying through the website? What would be your recommendations? I don't know, Joeri, if you want to go first on that front.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one can get involved in many different ways. And let me just highlight kind of the typical scientific ways of getting involved. I mean, what Antoinette already highlighted, so even for early career scientists, there are opportunities to become a chapter scientist. So you really become then part of kind of the core workings of a chapter. Sometimes this can be very tedious technical stuff, but you also are exposed to all the workings of everything that goes on in building a chapter. So that it really kind of is a very important first step into this. To be involved as a lead author or as a coordinating lead author, well, you need to be nominated by your government and you need to be an expert. So if you're an expert involved at that level, let your government know, let your focal point know that you want to be nominated. But actually, the very first level, and that anyone who has some expertise in climate science, be it from the physical science of impact, mitigation, and so on, one of the most important ways of getting involved is to register as an expert reviewer. And that you also do through the website. You highlight some of your papers or your credentials in an area, and then you become one of the kind of expert reviewers. There's literally thousands of them, and they review in several iterations the report and the different chapters. The reports themselves, there are thousands of chapters of pages, but as an expert reviewer, you can indicate which chapter you want to review, and then even there, if there's just one section that you know very, very much about, well, then you review that section and you just make sure that all the literature that is required is cited, that the literature is represented in a balanced way, and so on. So that is really kind of the first step that is most widely available for scientists to get involved in the IPCC. And maybe Jolene can add even more aspects to it from then the government side or the user side.
Yeah, sure. Maybe just come in from our side. So from the government side, it's ultimately being within your civil service and having your focal point reach out to you, make sure that they're coordinating across government. But we also, ask experts to help us with our review, and we will contact different people. So I couldn't agree with Joeri more that the good thing is to make yourself known to your focal point as well. So get in contact with them, let them know you're interested. The other way, I mean, this is a little bit further on, but I mentioned that the IPCC comprises of government members, but it also comprises of this elected bureau of experts as well. So these are the experts who are co-chairs of the working groups or vice co-chairs of the working groups, or even vice chairs of the IPCC itself and the chair itself. And this takes time, again, building up your expertise over a number of time, getting yourself known in the community. And then at some point at the beginning of each cycle, we go through an election process where experts are nominated again by their governments for particular positions on the bureau, and then we have a vote on those nominations. So there's different levels to it. So there's the actual, if you want to get involved with the science, you can go through the route as Joeri said. You can contribute as a coordinating lead author, a lead author, contributing author, or a chapter scientist in some way. Or you can get involved in the expert reviews, which is also really important, or the government route, which is something slightly different. I would also say there's one other route, which is what I did when I was a researcher, which is actually just publishing papers and making sure your research also contributes to the reports. So I couldn't tell you how happy I was when I saw my papers cited in, I think, the 4th assessment report. It was just like the most joyous moment ever. So really, really important to consider all the different routes and all the different ways you can contribute.
Just a really small follow-on question. How would you get in touch with your focal point person for your country? Because I'm not sure if everybody is aware of how that's possible. Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing is on the IPCC website, there's a list of all the focal points for each of the government, each member country. So that'll be your first port of call, really. Great. Thank you very much for that. We've got quite a lot of follow-up questions. So quite a broad one to begin with. How responsive would you say the government is to considering the IPCC reports, and how much impact do they have on government policies and international policies? I guess, Jolene, that might be the start off with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Okay, so I guess the first question, how responsive would I say UK government is? Probably comes to no surprise. I will say the UK has been very forward, forward-leaning on the climate change side of things for many, many years. We were the first government to have a Climate Change Act and put in place actual legislation and law for climate targets. And if you want to know how influential the IPCC reports, if you look at that, you'll see that the IPCC reports actually informed those targets back then. So already we were taking the findings of the report and we used it to set our own national targets. And then since then, so in the Climate Change Act, we had our independent advisors, the Committee on Climate Change was created. They always look at the IPCC reports in looking at their analysis. And maybe if I'm thinking of more recent examples, a really obvious one would be the 1.5 degree report and our UK's net zero target. So the 1.5 degree report has been hugely influential all over the world, I would say. Since then, you've obviously seen youth taken interest, you've seen businesses and industry taken interest, and they're all starting talking about net zero targets. Probably Joeri also could, because I guess he wrote the very critical line in that report, hugely influential. And I really don't think without that report coming out that we'd be quite as far as we were in terms of setting net zero targets in the world. And more generally, another example would be the fifth assessment report. And its role in the UNFCCC. So for those who might remember or might not, back in 2009, we were still talking about a 2-degree temperature goal. That's when when it was first started talking about, and that happened for a number of years. And then between 2013 and 2015, which is when the fifth assessment report was being written, the parties to the UNFCCC actually looked at the findings of that report in one of its scientific processes, looked at whether 2 degrees was adequate or not, and looked at progress towards it, and looked at whether it should be strengthened. And actually off the back of those findings, having looked at the AR5 findings, it said actually 2 degrees is really the maximum and we should be striving for 1.5 degrees. So from that process, it then led to the whole 1.5 degree, to the keeping temperature well below 2 degrees and pursuing efforts towards 1.5 degrees being recognised. So hugely influential. And then you also got the methodology reports on emissions coming out, which countries have to use in line with their international obligations for their own reporting. Plus other things informing adaptation. So the UK's climate change risk assessment is also informed by IPCC findings, as well as our own national findings as well. So I will stop there in case anyone else also wants to come in and add a few other points from other country perspectives.
Yeah, and Annetta, do you have any perspective for Guatemala and the reports?
In my case or in my region, I think IPCC is so important, but only in the academic level, because our governments doesn't know more issues about IPCC, but I think IPCC is not recognized here like Europe or Africa or North America, because we don't have a lot of leaders, authors, or LCAs in IPCC reports. We are few Latin people in IPCC, but little by little we push our area.
That's really great to hear. I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that and maybe talk about Indigenous people and women maybe as part of the IPCC and protecting biodiversity of the planet.
Yeah, this is part of the group 2 because this is part of the different regions. North America, Latin America, South America, Africa. This is the, I think this is the group for focus in different areas, especially group 2, indigenous people. But you know, the knowledge about indigenous people is so important, you know, in climate change issues.
And do you think the information is getting through to governments about these aspects?
No, no, no.
Okay, that's such a shame. Okay, great, thanks for that insight. A big question to follow. Do you believe we're on the right track towards the Paris Agreement targets by 2050 and the end of the century? And if so or not, what are your hopes for COP this year? Do you want to have a go at that one maybe to start?
Sorry, Amy, I think you cut out a little bit when you were speaking your question. So I don't know if that was for everyone, but certainly I missed the last half of your question. Maybe if I just come on a couple of bits and pieces. Can you hear me now?
Oh no.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, try again. So Joeri, do you think we're on the right track for ambitious targets for 2050 and the end of the century? And if not, or if so, what are your hopes for COP this year?
Yeah, so I mean, this is of course a totally different discussion. This is typically not something that IPCC comments on or would come out of the IPCC reports. But in line with what we're discussing here today and how IPCC feeds into these into the UNFCCC process, well, over the past decades, we have been looking at where emissions are going and where they should, where they're heading and where they should be going to be on track to limit warming to either 2 degrees or 1.5, and they've always been very much off track. Now they're still off track. However, in the past couple of years, we have really seen important improvements in our projections of where emissions would be heading and how close that would bring warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees. And in particular, in the past couple of years, and again, as also Jolene mentioned it, as a result and as a reaction to the publication of some of those IPCC reports, there have been many more net zero targets coming out or being announced, and these are really critical because they really result in a very strong dent in our projections of how much warming we will get by the end of the century. Currently, but the targets that are currently on the table do not yet bring warming to 1.5 or well below 2 degrees. However, that's why this year is so important. Today or this year, what we expect from the COP is that, or one of the aspects that we expect from the COP, is that countries come forward with new and updated pledges, what they call their nationally determined contributions. It's the first time since the Paris Agreement, since 2015, that countries come forward with new pledges. So it's a critical moment. It's a critical moment where we'll be seeing how the evidence that IPCC or UNEP provides to the negotiations every year really trickles down to the governments and then comes back with strengthened action. So for me, that is one really important aspect that I would like to see as an outcome of the COP. And then furthermore, I also would like the COP to kind of put in place processes and put in place ways that really ensure that decisions that are being made this year and over the next years really build on the best available science. And And examples of that were already mentioned by Jolene. Between 2013 and 2015, for example, there was a process called it's called a structured expert dialogue, where experts, scientific experts, and the delegates of the UNFCCC were able to communicate and dialogue about the scientific evidence. And that ultimately led then to kind of a strengthening of the targets, of the climate target, and better insight, and really a good representation of the scientific evidence. And these kind of processes are really essential, and these processes are decided at COPs, where governments decide on how to collaborate and how to solve this problem.
That's really helpful. And just to, it's one of the questions that we've got through, just to go in depth a little bit more. Does the IPCC go to governments and communicate with all governments, or is it only the governments that want to communicate about IPCC and create the reports? So I guess the question is, who are the member governments of the IPCC?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this, but Jolene is probably even in a much better place for this. But I would say something that that also picks up on a previous question of how this impacts governments. A really important part of writing IPCC reports is that governments are involved at multiple stages. And well, I might get the number wrong, but let's say there are more than 190 member countries of the IPCC, and these are all invited to elect the members of the Bureau, to define the topics and the substance of the report, then to review them, and then to provide comments, and finally to also approve the summary for policymakers. And that process not only ensures that the scientific quality of the report is and the robustness is as good as possible, but also results in ownership by the governments of the final product. And that is really also why these reports are impactful, because ultimately they have, at least the summaries have to some degree been co-produced. And yeah, maybe Jolene can provide a bit more insights on these processes and how that then really feeds through.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. No, you're exactly right. So there are 195 countries, member countries to the IPCC, and at the heart of the IPCC is that it's an inclusive process, and that every one of those member countries has a voice in the IPCC. The whole point of coming together, everyone being invited to the review, leads to that feeling of ownership by everyone. It's why it becomes so powerful and so influential. It's the reason why we can bring it into the UNFCCC, because all of those 195 countries of the IPCC will have accepted and approved those reports. So they've already endorsed it, if you like. And when we get to UNFCCC, we can bring those findings without any country saying, sorry, I don't accept that. It's like, well, you must do, because you have already signed up to it in the IPCC. So it makes it much easier to bring into that. And I just to address a couple of the questions, geographical balance across all the IPCC's work is very important. It's one of the conversations we've been having a lot over recent years, and there's geographical balance. Every regional group, so there are a number of regional groups set by the World Meteorological Organization. Everyone has a number of positions on the Bureau, but also when we're looking at the balance of authors across the reports, we very much strive to have a balance between those coming from, say, developed countries and those coming from developing countries, because everyone has a unique perspective to add. And if we want to understand the problem, it really requires all those voices to be heard. So that really is an important process from that. And I would say in the sixth assessment report, coming back to the question about Indigenous knowledge, if you look, so if you go on the IPCC website, you can see the agreed outlines for each one of the reports that all the countries have come together. And what you'll notice in those reports, and particularly working group 2, which is all about impacts and adaptation, there's a real effort to recognize that traditional knowledge and information from Indigenous peoples is really critical to having a good understanding, that there is information to be gleaned from that will inform our response and inform our knowledge of what's happening to different communities around the world. It's very much being brought in now, and that's really, really good to see. There's so many people calling for that, so many countries calling for this kind of information. Regarding UNFCCC, how does it get into that whole process? Many different ways. There are formal processes that are agreed, where each report has a special event where all its findings are presented to parties to the UNFCCC. There are specific, say, negotiation agenda items, so specific discussions that happen in the UNFCCC, which are dedicated to looking at maybe particular bits of information from the IPCC. And the structured expert dialogue that Joeri mentioned was one such process. If you go back to the convention itself, so the very original agreement that countries, that member parties agreed in 1992, and look at the original convention, you'll see there's a whole section on research and systematic observation there, all about making sure the science is brought into the process, making sure that we, keep an eye on scientific capability and countries having access to that information. And again, throughout all of the decisions that you see in the history of the IPCC, you'll see recognition that action is most effective if it's informed by the best available science. And that best available science is almost like a code word for the IPCC. It's very much seen as really the authoritative source of scientific and technical information on climate change, because it does this comprehensive assessment across all the latest literature, really, all in one place that no other body does. So it has a really special role in UNFCCC, and there are many different processes within that to get it recognised. We can talk some more about that if people are more interested, but hopefully that answers the questions that have come up.
Great, thanks for that, Jolene. A couple of more explanation questions, I guess. Vanessa, you might be best placed for this one. How many people work on each of the IPCC documents, and how does interdisciplinary scientific collaboration occur when everyone's across the world? Like how do conversations and drafting happen? Don't know if you want to start, Vanessa.
Can you repeat the question, please? Because I feel so. I have a few Wi-Fi. I lost the sign.
So how does interdisciplinary scientific collaboration across the world happen? How does the drafting process happen? How do people communicate to each other across the world?
In few words, we have 4 meetings, LA's meetings, and then the little authors writing a first draft is a shock. The second one is then send the governments or the experts or another reviewers. Then is the fourth, is the second draft. In this part or in this process, the government put their comments or issues about the draft. And then finally, what is the name, Rogeri? The second, the third?
Last is the final government draft.
Okay, this is the last. And then finally is the final report. And this is in few words, 3 draft and the final draft on the final document.
And then how do authors collaborate on such works? So how do people know how the drafting system is working?
IPCC has a great leader for technical support unit, and the meetings or the process is so with discipline, with times, and so hard communication about the draft. I don't know what happened, but it's different in this COVID time, because you don't have a lot of time with meetings, Zoom meetings, and other issues. But in this case, it's so hard, the collaboration with the LAs or authors, because we don't have time for all draft. But I don't know, Joeri, you can help me with that time, because it's different for different groups, you know?
Joeri,
Yeah.
can you also maybe explain how the working groups like cross collaborate as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me first pick up on how a chapter is written and the process there. Antoinette already explained there's actually 4 main lead author meetings where kind of the key milestones are being set. But in between those meetings, of course, lots of work is going on, and somehow COVID was a real disruptor in all these processes. Many of those in-person meetings could not take place. But an advantage or one silver lining is that we are now much more familiar with virtual and online collaboration tools. And that really helps. For example, in Working Group 1, we have Slack channels, which is kind of an online collaboration platform where we have discussions ongoing. And that is really a way in which people from around the globe can contribute to the discussion, even if it's kind of asynchronous, not in their exact time zones. So that is really useful. And then, of course, there are these kind of methods where you have what we call sprints. So you have lots of authors commenting on one document, and then you close it for 2 or 3 days, and then the lead authors or the coordinators need to clean it up, and then everybody can comment again, and it's just kind of 24 hours so that everybody around the globe can comment and so on, and then there are calls in between to resolve issues and so on. And that's just in one working group. To collaborate between the working groups, there are various avenues. Most importantly is actually that at the end, each working group publishes a report, but at the end, the IPCC also prepares a synthesis report, which basically brings the insights of all the 3 working groups together. And so in this cycle in particular, we have started to think about that last report from the beginning, which is really important, because otherwise you get like 3 different puzzle pieces and they don't match. And now actually we were making the puzzle pieces so that they will match at the end. And one way of collaborating is by inviting authors from different working groups, so that work on different topics, to your chapter meetings, so they can listen in, also provide some guidance, and yeah, lots of coordination that starts from the beginning to align the different assessments of the different working groups.
Great, thank you very much for that. And then supposedly the top question currently is, do you get paid for working for the IPCC? The question that everybody wants to know.
I can answer that. No, the IPCC does not pay you, but we are, of course, we are academics, and we are paid by university, by our jobs, and this is what we call service to the community, or service to well, in this case, the international community or the science community. So we do take this commitment up in addition to what our normal job is, our normal day jobs, and very often that conflicts in terms of time and resources with our day jobs, and in a way it's even harder for authors in developing countries, where there is a much smaller cohort or much smaller number of scientists that can be selected from. So it all falls on the shoulders of the same people all the time. And so it is a really important additional commitment that you take up on top of your daily activities. But no, we are not paid for it, but we also do it, we wouldn't be doing it for the money. We do it because we think it is really important work for all the reasons that we have been discussing today, for how it feeds into the governments, how it informs them. And ultimately, I can also say that as a scientist, it's also really interesting, motivating, and exciting to speak to all those colleagues and to figure out our best understanding of our about climate change. So it's both altruistic and also a bit egoistic.
Great, thank you very much for that. So we just need to wrap up now, sadly. Hopefully we got through quite a lot of your questions. I was just wondering if each of the panelists could give 30 seconds of what their most memorable part of working with the IPCC is. Jolene, do you want to go first, if you can think of one?
Thank you. Oh, there are so many memorable moments. It's hard to pick one. Maybe the one that really sticks out is when we finally approved the 1.5 degree report. We all knew we were working towards something special, and getting to the end of that week, knowing that we've got this amazing report. I mean, maybe we didn't quite realize just how influential it would be at that point, but we knew there was a really special report that we just produced. So that moment at the end was fantastic, and the moment after it, when it started having a huge influence, yeah, really, really good. Thanks.
I feel like Joeri might have the same one.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, it's definitely linked to the 1.5 report, the final approval, the final hours of the approval. But to be honest, I also, one of the most memorable moments was when it then was presented in the UNFCCC at the special event. That was really special because, yeah, it was such a massive effort, and then I think we were able to pull something together that ultimately made a really big impact. And yeah, that's definitely the most impressive moment, I think.
Great. And then do you have something from this year's or this cycle's ongoing one?
My two last Christmas, I was working in the IPCC reports. And the last one is amazing experience with a lot of specialists and experts around the world in climate change. And for young people here, you can do it little by little. For review expert, chapter scientists, LAs, or CA, LAs, CLADs, and Peru, and other levels, you know. But if you want, apply, and then little by little, and push, and be passionate. And thank you.
Great. Hopefully that's really useful advice for everyone. So we just have one last bit to ask before you leave today, and that's to go back to Slido and just give us a very, very short review of the event and how you found the event today. So back to slido.com if you've closed it with 682576, and then just some little bits on what you're taking away from this event would be really great.